make for a great interview. What makes for a great interview is a fabulous lifetime of research into the UFO and alien abduction phenomena and the credentials to justify his work. Joe Lewels is a PhD. He's an internationally known author and speaker. He holds his PhD in journalism and mass communication from the University of Missouri. He's got an MS in education from Troy State University. He is a certified hypnotherapist. He has worked with many abductees, and he's drawn some quite remarkable conclusions and made some fascinating discoveries about the UFO phenomenon, especially as it relates to the distant origins of contact in biblical times. We're going to have an absolutely fascinating journey with Joel today, talking about things like the reptilians, the watchers, and who it was who was here before the catastrophe that we now call the flood wiped away all traces of their existence among us, leaving us with the myths that we hold now. Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God is Joe's new book, available from your bookstore, from our online bookstore, from Amazon, from just about everywhere. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Whitley. Just a pleasure to talk to you again. One of your biggest fans.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's mutual. I believe the last time we talked was when you had a previous book out. If I can remember the name of it, I can't.
The God Hypothesis.
The God Hypothesis, that's right.
Right. They came out 10 years apart.
So it's been that long. Gosh, I've been doing Dreamland for a while.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this is the sequel to the God Hypothesis.
Well, okay, now let's get into this whole story a little bit. And first, I would like to, you have a very unique take on this. You're not like Bud Hopkins or David Jacobs, although you know their work very well. You
right.
have your own unique take. And Joe, what would you say is the primary difference between your work and that of other UFO investigators?
I think the
abduction
primary
investigators. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the primary difference is that I did not come into this research with a firm notion of what it was. I questioned everybody and everyone's conclusions who had already been involved in this before I got involved. I just came into it like with a blank slate. And what I immediately noticed was that there was a vast difference between what I was getting from the people that I was researching, the UFO experiencers. I was getting through our research, and I had a team that included a psychiatrist and qualified hypnotherapist, and you know, right away we were getting people during hypnotic regression gaining information about past lives. That was the first thing. We were getting a lot of out-of-body stuff. It was much spookier than what I was reading about in the books by the researchers that you named.
Well, many of those researchers, Joe, would just set aside anything like an out-of-the-body description or a near-death experience or past life, and assume that was part of the masking of the actual experience.
Exactly. And then, of course, I was hit right away with cases where reptilians played a significant role in the abduction cases, the abduction experiences, numerous of these. And they weren't being written about by anybody.
No, they weren't. You know, my new book, my novel, it's coming out in September 2012, The War for Souls, it contains it's very substantially about reptilians because they represent a very important part of the phenomenon and one that tends to be ignored and has been, to a degree, harmed by the strangeness of it and also some of the more peculiar claims, such as David Icke's claim that the Queen of England is a shape-shifted reptilian. Which
I had never ran across anything like that. But
you've never run across any shape-shifted reptilians either. Neither have I.
No. But I will say that they do play an important role, and I dealt with them a lot in my my first book.
Well, this is extremely interesting to me because I started out dealing with the Greys, and I became gradually aware of this other presence in my experience, and eventually I began to see something that reaches across the whole of human history, which is why the rulers of the earth excites me so much. But tell us a little bit more about your impression of them.
Well, the first thing that came to my attention was that they were very much in charge in a lot of cases. They seemed to have a position of power and authority and even respect from the other types of beings. And we were getting cases where all the kinds of beings showed up in the same place. You know, we were having cases where they were, you know, the small grays, the tall grays, the insectoids, you know, the ones that look like praying mantises, human-looking ones, and reptilians. It was like,
it's very interesting that you mentioned the praying mantis type ones, because very few people I'm aware of mention those. I've seen one of those. I saw one once, and
they're quite common.
Well, tell us more about what they are like.
Well, again, they and I've had a chance to interview people, experiencers from all over the world now, and hundreds, and I've had the opportunity to study in depth over 100 cases, and so I don't think that I can say that I know everything about this, but I know enough to know that a lot of stuff is not being reported by some researchers. They're pretty much stuck into a mode, you know, that they have
a theory and they fit the cases to the theory. Well, that's why I find talking to you so exciting, because you don't do that. You're a very rigorous investigator, and you don't fit. You know, you just basically let the witnesses describe what they remember, and you take it from there.
Yeah, I made a promise when I started doing my research, and it was a promise to myself and a promise to God and a promise to my readers that I would report everything that I found, no matter how crazy it seemed. And that doesn't mean that people have to believe it, but it's my pledge that I will be honest in my research. I think that is so important because you know, I tell about my own religious background. It's pretty much autobiographical, a great part of this, because what I found is you cannot be objective. You in this, when you're dealing with this subject matter, this involves the entire human race, and to go in as the objective reporter and try to stay aloof and not get involved is, I think, an impossibility.
Of course it is, and in some respects, this is what has happened to some of the investigators, because they've ended up filtering the descriptions of through a belief system. But on the other hand, Joe, they would turn around and say, no, we have this set of very comprehensible things that happen to people. And we also know that these beings are experts at deception, and therefore that they are trying to insinuate themselves into our world and to link themselves to our mythology to make it look as if they've been part of our world for a long time. Now, what evidence do you see outside of the abduction phenomenon that would suggest that. Now, I know this is a big question, and we're not going to go directly to it because we're coming up on the first break. But just give us an overview. I think that you could tell me about the discoveries you've made in, for example, biblical texts.
Yeah. Well, I think that in order to hold on to that convoluted reasoning that you just described, you have to assume that this phenomenon started maybe 50 or 60 years ago.
Right. You have to say that there was nothing before that,
exactly.
And that's all. That the attempt to make it look like that is all deception.
Right. But it's so easy to disprove that by going back into not just ancient texts like the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi texts and the Sumerian and Babylonian texts and the Egyptian texts. I mean, the Hindu texts. I mean, they're all full of aerial phenomena, okay? But you can go back just a few hundred years to the Renaissance, and you can find artistic paintings painted by rather famous artists of their time who were painting religious paintings that had UFOs, flying saucers, manned aerial craft in the background, which were just kind of put there, and nothing was ever said about them. But now those paintings hang in the famous museums of Europe. And so I found just trainloads of material that led me to the conclusion that this not only was an old phenomenon, but it was a phenomenon that dates back to the beginnings of life on Earth.
And when we get back, we're going to be talking about just exactly what Joe did find that would suggest from the writings and paintings and artistic work of the distant past that the visitors really have been with us for a very long time. And what might that mean in the context of a world that now seems to be coming apart at the seams environmentally? If they are here, and they have been here all along, and they are in control of the situation, why are they letting it fall apart? We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Joe Lewels, his new book, Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God, available from your bookstore, available from our bookstore, available from it in all over the country, and do get a copy of it. A lot of people, Robert Dean said it's a beautiful book. I've baptized it with tears throughout. Thank you. Rulers of the Earth is the complete companion to the God Apostles. Dr. Lewels is gifted both his higher self and humanity with the opportunity to experience the law of karma through the cycle of reincarnation, and by revealing the arrival of a new age of consciousness, says Leo Sprinkle, someone I haven't talked to in a long time, and I need to get back on this radio program. Joe, we were just about to begin to talk about the past, and yeah. I think we're going to table a detailed discussion of the reptilians until later in the show. Let's instead now talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library and their significance, specifically the naming of the gods and the difference between the popular Bibles of today and what was being said in the Bible in those days.
Yes. Well, Whitley, what I found was very interesting when I scoured the not only the Old Testament and the New Testament, but when I studied the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi texts, which are the lost Gospels of the New Testament, I found some really interesting things. One of the things that I found was that as far back as maybe 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, there was the beginnings of we could call it a cover-up or a rewriting of history. There was among the Dead Sea Scrolls the oldest copy of the Old Testament, the first five books of the Old Testament ever found, and and this, it gave us a glimpse into what changes might have been made between then and present-day Bible. Well, there's one interesting passage in Deuteronomy, that's Deuteronomy 32:8, colon 8, in which the current Bibles have this saying: when the Most High, meaning God, appointed the nations, when he divided the sons of man, he established the borders of the peoples according to the numbers of the sons of Israel. Now, that's what it says in your Bible today. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the same passage says, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided the sons of man, he established the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now, that's a totally different meaning. And so the researchers, scholars who have studied these scrolls, they saw that and they said, wait a minute, someone somewhere along the way changed the word sons of Israel from the original term sons of God. So there's two questions that come up here. First of all, who were the sons of God? Supposedly there was just one, and that was Jesus. But remember, this is the Old Testament. And secondly, why would they change the term? What would they gain by changing the term to the sons of Israel? Well, when obviously when the earth was made, and if God did apportion the earth according to the sons of God, let's say, Israel didn't exist at that time. So the true meaning is the original one in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sons of God. But we have to ask, well, who are the sons of God? And the answer to that is, in the Bible anyway, that these were a race of superhuman beings who were given control over the earth and who have watched over the earth and all its life forms from the very beginning. And we find the term sons of God in many parts of the Bible that haven't been edited. But the editing process is not always perfect, and we get the idea about the sons of God, who are also at times called the Watchers, all the way from the beginning in Genesis, where the Watchers came down from the heavens and mated with women and had a race of giants called the Nephilim. We find it really throughout the Bible and here and there, but there was evidence. There was
something I just want to stop for a moment and talk a little bit about the Nephilim, because in the days when this was happening, the human being was much smaller than he is now. 4'8" to 5 feet were 5'6" was a big man.
Yes.
If the Nephilim had, for example, been as tall as Northern Europeans are today, 6 feet to 6'2" or 3, they would have been normal size by our standards, but gigantic by the standards of the people living in that time. And
I think we have to take the word giant, with a little bit of
because
salt,
we always think, there couldn't be any Nephilim around anymore. But maybe what we're looking at is the introduction of a new gene into the human species that is now everywhere on the planet, including in your blood and mine. It
could be. Now, remember that the sons of God were mating with humans. This was happening before the Great Flood. And whenever the Great Flood was, which I think maybe 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, before that, and before those civilizations were wiped out, that's when these stories are written about. And then much of this civilization was wiped out, and we had to start all over again. This is a cyclical way of looking at history, but I think it is a correct way, that there have been many cyclical periods where humanity has built up intelligence and built up technology, and then it was all destroyed in the Great Cataclysm. Then there's hundreds of years that pass, maybe thousands, before humans get back on track and knowledge is regained and writing is regained, and then we start all over again. We see evidence of this now in our archaeology throughout history. So to me, it seems as if the major cultures of the world were all in agreement that there was a time before the modern times, let's say of 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, when great civilizations lived on the earth and were ultimately destroyed. And we think of that as Atlantis today, but I think that it was numerous cultures and in numerous places. So the search for Atlantis is, I think, a little too narrow. I think they find a lot of ancient civilizations now, but they may not all be Atlantis. I definitely think there was something that would in our prehistory that would bring this to life. These stories to life.
There's been some recent and absolutely extraordinary scientific work that has been done on the prehistory of North America in particular, which I'm hoping to have the authors of this book on. They have been, they're scientists, and they have been presenting their findings at scientific conferences, and once that phase is finished, they'll be glad to come on the air and talk to us. But what they have discovered was that the Laurentian ice sheet about 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, was hit by something so gigantic that if you can believe this awesome statement, and they have proved that it's true, it hit the center of the ice sheet over what is now the Great Lakes, and icebergs, actual big, gigantic, multi-ton icebergs were sprayed around the North American continent as far away as New Mexico. I mean, this was big. The entire ice sheet melted over the next few months to the point where if you had gone back to the North America of that time, the whole continent, from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic coast, would have been beneath water that was as much as low as waist deep and as high as hundreds and hundreds of feet deep. The whole continent.
That's amazing.
Oh, I think astonishing. But let me just finish. In any case, now I want to just go back. There is, in my book Confirmation, or rather The Secret School, there is a discussion about the effect of impacts on evolution on this planet. And I want to propose the possibility that somebody actually did that on purpose, sterilizing all memory, all definite knowledge of the presence of the Watchers, and leaving us to develop in another phase of civilization on our own, which is about to end. How do you react to that?
Well, I have to say that thought has crossed my mind many times. I think that these beings who have, I think there are beings who seeded life on Earth from the very beginning, who then have watched it grow and who have intervened in the evolutionary process, and they have experimented, and I think those experiments could easily include times when they just wanted to start all over again and just wipe the slate clean. And in fact, through my contacts with the UFO experiencer community, I have gotten messages from non-human intelligence, and one of those messages was when one of my subjects asked one of the beings that she was in contact with, well, is the human race an experiment? And the answer was, all life forms are an experiment. And I think from their perspective, they see Earth as kind of a playground for experiments. And,
which sounds very ominous, Joe. And we're gonna take a little break right now, and we're gonna get back to Joe Lewels, and we're gonna ask him a question. The question is gonna be this: what are we, and why are we here? We'll be right back. Okay, we're back with Joe Lewels. His book, Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God, available from bookstores everywhere, available from our bookstore. A very neat painting is right on the cover of the Blessed Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus, a Renaissance painting, and behind her head, a UFO. Can you tell us a little bit about this painting, Joe, before we get back to the gigantic question that we left you with?
Yeah, well, that's a good thing to point out. That painting, that painting is was done by the people at Gallaudet Press who published the book as artwork for the cover of the book.
Oh, so it's not an actual Renaissance painting?
No, it is. It's just that the UFO wasn't there.
The UFO wasn't in the Renaissance painting. Yeah, okay, that's very important for us to know. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, and they do have a note in the at the beginning of the book about that. But if you turn back to the there is a page that has a bunch of photographs on it. It does have a photograph of a actual Renaissance painting that of the Madonna and Child, and it does have a UFO in the background. And that one is a very famous painting that hangs in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, Italy. And I discuss that painting in my book quite a bit. But
yes, and I have personally looked at that painting, by the way, folks, up close, and I have seen it said or stated that the UFO, the object behind the Virgin in the painting, is an artifact of damage to the canvas. This is a lie. It's not just simply a misapprehension, but it's an absolute lie. If you look at the painting, you can clearly see where the artist labored with very small brushes to make this object.
Yeah, and also he put somebody on the shoreline looking up at it, shielding his eyes from the sun so he could get a good look at it. So that was not done by mistake. And we find, now that the Da Vinci Code has come out, it has focused the public's attention on the fact that Renaissance painters of religious art quite often had symbolic hidden symbols that would have been considered heretical or part of what we call the occult today. But this is not the only painting that has UFOs in the background. There are many, many such paintings. But anyway, I think for those who want to learn about this, there's plenty of evidence that UFOs and what we call aliens today have been around for a lot longer than modern researchers would have us believe. And I'd like to get to your question that you left the listeners with about who are we and what are we doing here and all of that, because I think that is really the core question that we always come to when we discuss this topic, if we're ready to go there.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just sitting here listening with my ears are open.
Okay. Well, I'll give you my take and what I wrote about in my book. And that is that I think that the human race is an experiment. And I think that the experiment is to blend or mesh together somehow godlike beings, that is, immortal, powerful, spiritual, non-physical entities, which we are, with animals, and to blend the two together in such a way that the God within us, the part within us that is that spark that's connected to God, it dims to the point where after a few years in this body that's been created for us, specifically to experience a three-dimensional reality, we forget who we are. We start developing an ego. We start behaving in ways that are contrary to God's laws. And God's laws are basically the golden rule. You don't do unto others what you wouldn't have them do unto you. It's the basic teachings of Jesus, which is to love thy neighbor It is the idea that you turn the other cheek, that violence is bad, that we should live our lives in servitude to our fellow man. These are wonderful notions, but they are not lived up to very much by even people who call themselves good Christians today. And I don't think you have to be a Christian to follow those rules. I think people from any culture at any time frame could follow those rules, and when you do, when you die, your soul is restored to its original condition. Then if you've lived a good life, you move on to higher realms. I think that the earth is really the lowest of all the realms. If there is a hell, I think this is it. In the Lost Gospel,
that's very interesting, and it's a point of disagreement on both of our parts. But I think that hell has emerged into our world, that it's constantly trying to break out and take over our world. That and this is one of the big themes of 2012, my book 2012, incidentally. That, for example, the Nazis were the most recent effort on the part of this extraordinary darkness to manifest itself in the physical world, and that there is a battle between the light and dark forces, and we are the battleground because each time they gain something, some kind of energy from capturing or releasing our souls, depending on who they are. How do you respond to theories like that?
Well, I definitely see the earth as a battleground between the forces of dark and the forces of light. I don't like to use the word evil because I don't think that we humans have enough perspective to judge whether something is evil or not, pure evil.
What about the Holocaust?
Look, let's say this. The purpose of life on earth is to give people choices to do good or to do bad. And our choices are being recorded, I believe. And, you don't have opportunities to do good unless there is something bad going on. So the whole of human history is nothing but really a long battle where souls in the form of humans have many choices in every lifetime to learn the lessons of being with the light or being with the darkness. And I think we have the capability, each of us, to be in either one. And it's our choice and our decision that we have to make to be in the light, with the light. And I think if we do that our souls will gain release from this mess. We might not be able to save the planet, and we may not be able to save everybody around us, because not everybody will accept what we're saying, but we can certainly do what it takes to save our own soul. And when we die, nobody's there with us to support us. We're there alone, and we have to, as the song says, we have to walk that lonesome valley. We have to walk it by ourselves. And so it's the actions that we take in our lifetime that will be judged at the end. And then, as it's so elegantly put in the Lost Gospels, in the Lost Secret Gospel of John, Jesus explains to John what happens when you die, what happens to a soul, and he explains that the righteous ones are given up to the higher realms, but the unrighteous ones are given over to what they call the archons being those that control life on earth. And then after a period, they are sent back to be cast into fetters and chains once again. And the term fetters and chains refers to the human body, to be born of a woman again.
So you're saying, therefore, that all of us are in this state now. We have all missed the mark, or we wouldn't be here.
I think that's true. or there are people who, like Jesus, who voluntarily came back into this world and who did it for a purpose of trying to set things straight and tried to help humanity to walk the right path. And, you know, in one of the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, "You're like blind men." He says, "You don't know where you came from. You don't know why you're here. You don't know how you got here. You don't know what you're doing here. You don't know what you're supposed to be doing here. You don't know what's going to happen to you when you leave here. You don't know what you're supposed to do when you get there." He says, "And I'm here to tell you all of those things." And that's what I think is the essence of what Jesus was here all about, to give us the roadmap for our souls to follow, so that we can walk his path and not create bad karma, so that we don't have to come back here again.
Well, Joe, we're going to take a little break right now, and when we get back, we're going to be talking about the reptilian connection and what it means in the context of everything we've discussed so far. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Joe Lewels, his new book, Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God, available from your local bookstore, available from our bookstore on unknowncountry.com. Don't miss it, Rulers of the Earth. It is a wonderful and insight-filled look at the abduction phenomenon in a whole new light, a whole new context that you just don't get from the conventional UFO community, but which is absolutely essential to understanding what's really going on. And Joe, one of the mysteries of the phenomenon has always been the presence of the reptilians. Now, when I first had close encounters, I thought that was just had to be a fantasy, until I saw one of these enigmatic creatures very, very briefly, but enough to where it was not any real question in my mind, but it was real. And the eye that I saw was so brilliantly intelligent, it was obviously a highly, highly evolved being, even though it was not a very pretty-looking thing at all. Now, I have wondered, I've had experiences of moving into parallel universes, and I have had on this program Colm Kelleher, who worked at the National Institute for Discovery Sciences ranch and managed it for years, Bob Bigelow's ranch in Utah, where they actually witnessed incredible events that seemed to be movements between parallel universes. Now, if there is an Earth in which the dinosaurs never went extinct, that might mean that millions of years before we evolved, a dinosaur or reptilian creature evolved intelligence, maybe 50 million years ago.
Yeah.
And that they, in their world, have had all of this time to evolve technology and deep, deep understanding of the universe. And we are actually the experiment, not of another planet or people from another world, but people from right here on Earth, just micrometers away from us. How do you react to that?
I could not argue against that, to tell you the truth, because the one thing that has always just been tantalizingly out of reach is the issue of where do these beings come from? Are they really from other planets? Do they live underground? Do they live in spaceships? I mean, I really don't have an answer to that. I'm much more open to the concept of other dimensions and interdimensional travel. I've talked to too many people who have seen portals opening up out of thin air in reptilian or some other type of being just walking right through it into their bedroom.
Joe, could you have in your memory a specific enough incident to describe one for us?
Yeah.
Please do.
A couple of cases very similar. A woman that I have worked with for several years who has had innumerable reptilian experiences, who she describes as being very powerful, very intelligent, and some of them quite noble, and although horrible to look at, not necessarily evil. But she had an experience where she was asleep in bed, and she was taken by force by a reptilian through apparently a wormhole or a portal directly into what appeared to be a cave. It was very musty and damp, and this reptilian, who appeared to be like a teenager, attempted to have intercourse with her and was somehow unable to get it done. And as this experience was unfolding, a small gray being that she considers to be a friendly one just came and got her by the hand and led her back through the tunnel to the cave and back into her room and got her back in bed. And her take on it was that this reptilian was just a young, stupid, and not very highly evolved one. And I had another case. It was actually one of John Mack's cases, who I got to speak with shortly after his death. And she had a similar experience of being taken through a portal out of her bedroom at night, but she believed that she had been raped and by a reptilian, and that she had puncture wounds, needle marks on her abdomen in a triangular shape afterwards, and was, although she was traumatized by it, amazingly, she said, well, there's just some of these guys that are not very evolved and are not necessarily representative of their species. I've had others tell me that there's a number of different reptilian races, and they're not all the same. That you can't judge them all by the actions of a few. So I don't have the best handle on who they are or where they come from. I just know that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of cases where people describe these kinds of lizard beings. Some people swear that they're good and they're helpful and they're not evil, and then others, depict them in a very lowly evolved form of life. But you have to think that even among humans there are all types. So why wouldn't there be of any other species? I really don't know all the answers, but I do know they're out there, and they are involved.
Something is certainly happening, and we have so many different ways of looking at it. It's almost as if whatever is there has kind of deployed itself in such a way that almost every aspect of human consciousness would be engaged in one way or another in the process of understanding it. Now, I asked that in this context. I mentioned that in the context of the question I'm just about to ask, and that is that we seem to be hell-bent in a state of decline environmentally that is at the very least going to leave the human species severely bruised over the next couple of 100 years, to the point where I say severely bruised, that there are going to be probably a couple of billion less human beings on this planet in 100 years than there are now, and maybe a whole lot less human beings, depending on how bad it gets. Now, why wouldn't, if we are their experiment, would not they want to preserve us? Or what do you think about that?
good question. Well, I do think that they are trying to preserve us. I think that they, from all the case studies that I have been involved in, there is definite evidence that they collect the DNA from all life forms, that they have vast storehouses of DNA that's stored up, in wherever, frozen in wherever they keep it, that they have the ability to restart the human race or any other deviation of the human race, either here after a few hundred or thousand years or someplace else. So I think they are concerned with their materials, the raw materials that we are made of. But one of my experiencers, as I prefer to call them, because I think the term alien abduction is a very negative thing, and it brands people and stigmatizes people. But one of my experiencers asked one of these beings, well, why don't you help us? Why don't you come in and fix the problem? And the answer was, well, you would just do it all over again. The human race has to evolve to the point where it realizes that it's doing harm to the earth, and it's doing harm to itself when it does harm to others and when it harms the earth. And so they see the human race as very lowly evolved, and the only solution to the problem is to make a species of humans that is more psychic, more spiritually mature, and a species that will understand that you can't do this to the earth. And when you have that kind of a species running the earth, then this kind of thing won't happen anymore. But from the looks of it, it's happening awfully slowly. That change is happening very slowly. And also, something
the change to us, you mean but the change to the planet, unfortunately, is happening very fast.
Yeah, exactly. The coming of the new species of human that would be able to unravel this mess is coming too slowly. The changes are happening too quickly. I think that they are trying to awaken people to this. Even in my book, The God Hypothesis, which was published 10 years ago, I spent a good portion of the last couple of chapters dealing with the warnings that the experiencers were getting about the climate change, the global warming, the horrible pollution, the breaks in the food chain that have already occurred, and the changes that's making in the human body are horrible. And these warnings have gone unheeded, and they've gone unheeded because the main researchers of this phenomenon tell people that you can't trust what these aliens say. They're deceptive. They're they are not to be trusted. So
you have to wonder if these researchers aren't part of another agenda, either wittingly or unwittingly, and one which is directed toward ending the human species or bringing it down.
I've wondered that myself, Whitley. I really just think that they're just not very spiritually evolved people. They can't see beyond the materialistic view of the earth and of the world that has been portrayed to us by our scientific community erroneously for so long, making atheists out of people. It's like, well, you cannot be spiritual and be a scientist at the same time. It's that idea. And so people who try to befriend the scientific community have to behave in a way that is atheistic. You cannot approach this from a spiritual point of view, or the scientific community won't have anything to do with you.
Joe Lewels, we have come to the end of our time together on Dreamland. I would like to thank you very much for being with us, and there is so much more to find out in his wonderful book, Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God. You can get it at your bookstore. You can get it from the unknowncountry.com bookstore. You can get it just about anywhere. Joe has put a lot of effort and research into this. It is enlightening, and for anyone who is a close encounter witness, it is deeply freeing, not in the sense that it's going to make you think that something hard was actually something easy, but in the sense that it is going to enable you to think about and consider your experiences in the much larger context, which is probably where they belong. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. This week, Linda Howe has got a wild story for us, so listen up. You know the old joke that the CIA was somehow involved in the creation of the National Enquirer? Well, somebody's been looking into that, and it is no joke. Linda Howe is an Emmy Award-winning science reporter. Her website, earthfiles.com, is the finest website of its kind in the world. It gives you the facts and goes into the stories that the others dare not. Earthfiles.com. Linda, welcome to Dreamland, and what a report you have today.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, recently at the Eureka Springs, Arkansas UFO conference, journalist Terry Hansen was a speaker. Terry is author of a very important book entitled The Missing Times, News Media Complicity in the UFO Cover-Up. Terry described his research of World War II when America's Office of Strategic Services, known also as the OSS, and was the precursor to the CIA, appealed to major news media in the interests of national security to help with censorship and propaganda during the war years. By September 1947, right after World War II, and only a couple of months after the alleged crash of a UFO disc, or perhaps many UFO discs, between Corona and Roswell, New Mexico, the Central Intelligence Agency was formed. Over the next 3 decades, the CIA used those war relationships with CBS, the New York Times, and other major U.S. media to maintain its control over sensitive subjects, including the UFO phenomenon. And they did that by keeping CIA control over certain well-placed executives in news agencies. Facts about the CIA propaganda and censorship working relationship with certain American media executives came to light during the 1975 hearing of the United States Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. The hearing was chaired by U.S. Senator Frank Church, Democrat from Idaho. The committee investigated illegal intelligence gathering by the CIA and FBI revealed by the Watergate affair under President Richard Nixon. But Carl Bernstein, reporter at the Washington Post and colleague of Carl Woodward, who broke open the Watergate scandal, Carl Bernstein wrote a 1977 article for Rolling Stone that sort of summed it all up, and it was entitled How America's Most Powerful News Media Worked Hand in Glove with the Central Intelligence Agency and Why the Church Committee Covered It Up. One of the highly controlled subjects for decades has been the UFO phenomenon. One military voice who tried to tell the truth about UFOs, that they were not terrestrial, was U.S. Air Force Major Donald Kehoe. As fate would have it, in junior high school, Terry Hansen sat next to Major Kehoe's sister, and the two often talked about what Major Kehoe was saying about the astonishing disc maneuvers and that they were apparently extraterrestrial. Terry wanted to know why UFO events always seem to be covered up or reduced to balloons and swamp gas by the general media. During his research for his book, The Missing Times, he found both hard evidence of direct CIA silencing of media, such as the New York Times, on war issues, and a CIA and Mafia link to the creation of the most notorious UFO tabloid in America, the National Enquirer.
When the CIA was involved in Guatemala in the 50s, I think around 1954, the CIA was anxious for the American public to be kept ignorant of that fact, and the New York Times had a reporter down there who was covering the story. CIA, in order to make sure the American public didn't find out what was going on, simply contacted the publisher of the New York Times and requested that he pull the reporter off the story, and so they effectively killed the story right there before the public could find out about it. Another example that just came out fairly recently, in fact it was written up in the New York Times, had to do with the Bay of Pigs invasion in, I think it was 1962 or thereabouts. And at that time, the CIA had a relationship with the Associated Press and the UPI wire services so that it could actually place propaganda stories directly onto the international wires through those agencies. In other words, it could virtually write propaganda stories and had the cooperation of the wire services to distribute those stories worldwide. It's very well documented, I think. In the 1970s, the Church Committee in Congress held an investigation into these things. It was very well documented at the time that the New York Times, CBS, most of the major broadcast networks, in fact, had a covert relationship with the intelligence community and carried out all sorts of assignments ranging from providing cover for intelligence agents to censoring the news to distributing propaganda and so on. So this was all widely exposed. It was written up in the Columbia Journalism Review and then later in some popular publications such as Rolling Stone and some of those. And then eventually the New York Times, after it had been exposed, did a series of articles in which they confessed that they had done this. The news media, at least up through the mid-60s and 70s probably, was doing this kind of thing behind the scenes.
And that the justification was always in the interest of national security?
That's correct.
Now, could you explain the origin and evolution that led up to the creation of the National Enquirer?
Yeah, that's a very interesting story because it does actually begin in World War II. There was a well-known Italian-language newspaper on the East Coast called Il Progresso, and it was owned by a family called the Pope family, P-O-P-E, and Gene Pope Sr., I believe, started the paper, was a very influential East Coast power broker, and he was really supportive of Mussolini during World War II, and that got the attention of the U.S. intelligence community, the OSS, at the time, and they decided that they would try to infiltrate his newspaper to find out why he was supporting Mussolini. Well, I think it actually turned out that he just wanted a better relationship between Italy and the U.S., and he wasn't so much a backer of Mussolini. But at any rate, this was the first time that Il Progresso came to the attention of the intelligence community, possibly as a result of their monitoring the Gene Pope family. They became aware of his son, Gene Pope Jr. He was a fairly bright young man. He graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at age 19 in engineering, so it gives you an indication of how smart he must have been. Around 1950, there was a kind of internal family struggle over control of Il Progresso, and for some reason, Gene Pope Jr. lost out in that struggle and was sort of forced to go elsewhere, separate himself from the paper. And he found a job in, of all places, the CIA's Psychological Warfare Unit. That was 1951 when he started working for the CIA. About 1952, Gene Pope Jr. leaves the CIA. He's now about 25 years old, and he purchases a newspaper called the New York Enquirer, which was part of the Hearst Empire, for about $75,000 using what he described as an interest-free loan for $20,000 as a down payment.
And he was also working for the CIA at the same time?
Well, we don't really know that for sure. Officially, he left the CIA, but there are some reasons to think that he maintained some contact with them. He has kind of a mysterious background, and from what I've read, those who have tried to find government documents on Pope have been blocked for national security reasons. So his true relationship with the government, I don't think has been fully revealed at this time. But At any rate, he somehow managed to come up with some money, quite a bit of money, to buy the Hearst New York Enquirer, and then he later renamed that the National Enquirer, which, of course, is well known to many people now. The paper that he bought was actually in bad financial shape, and it required kind of a continual infusion of money to keep it afloat. I think the total funds needed to make the newspaper profitable was about $250,000. Now, that may not sound a lot in today's dollars, but if you adjust it for inflation, that's about $1.6 million in 2003 dollars. So it was a big chunk of change for a 25-year-old kid to come up with, and it raises a question, naturally, as to where he got the money. There's been a lot of speculation about that.
And the implication is that he might never officially have left the CIA, that he might have already been doing this as an assignment to get in this newspaper, and that's where the money came from?
Well, it's certainly a possibility, because you have to ask the question, how did somebody that young come up with such a large amount of money? And we know for a fact that in the early 1950s, the CIA was spending very lavishly on a broad range of media assets, as they called them, and it would have been very natural for someone who just came out of the CIA's Psychological Warfare Division to appeal to the CIA for funding, or to at least be qualified to obtain funding for some type of propaganda operation. Some people have said that the funding came from his godfather, who was mobster Frank Costello. Frank Costello was also connected with the OSS during World War II, where he did a lot of things for the intelligence community. So any way you look at it, there are these ties between the National Enquirer and the intelligence community.
And the mafia.
Yeah, well, the mafia, too. But, of course, the mafia and the intelligence community have been working together for many, many years as well. So they're all sort of one big family. But anyway, another connection to the intelligence community is that one of the first employees of the National Enquirer was a man by the name of Bill Bates, and he was a former OSS officer. So you find these consistent ties between the intelligence community and National Enquirer from a very early point in the paper's founding.
And is it fair to say that when you look back at that period of history that you researched, that the Central Intelligence Agency was essentially trying to wire so that they had influence and control on all the major media?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And one person commented to me that he thought it was kind of a stretch to believe that they would go to the trouble of funding a newspaper and all this, but actually it was a fairly common practice for the CIA. And when economist John Kenneth Galbraith went to India as ambassador under John Kennedy, he found a newspaper very much like the National Enquirer in India that he later discovered was financed by the CIA. So it was this type of psychological warfare trick was something the CIA was doing in other parts of the world. It provides some sort of circumstantial support for the theory that the Enquirer was a CIA operation.
If it were, could you now talk about how there seemed to be a concentration on Earth mysteries, specifically UFO stories in the National Enquirer?
People who are familiar with the history of the UFO controversy are probably aware of something called the Robertson Panel. In 1953, the CIA got involved in debunking UFO reports. They put together a panel chaired by a scientist called H.P. Robertson, and Robertson was a very high-level scientific intelligence man. He was a leading physicist as well as an intelligence officer and had played an important role in World War II. So Robertson's recommendation was that, or the recommendation of his panel was that UFOs be debunked by a covert mass media program of training and debunking, as they called it. So this, of course, was about almost the same time that the National Enquirer was getting started. And the National Enquirer, for many years thereafter, was one of the very few national U.S. newspapers to consistently cover the UFO topic. What's interesting about it is that most of their stories were quite accurate. They were sensational by their very nature, but they were quite accurate. Many of them were written by a journalist named Bob Pratt. The stories were true for the most part, but they mixed them in with a kind of this sort of tabloid mix of celebrity stories and trashy, sensationalistic topics, so that anyone who saw these stories in the National Enquirer would make a kind of mental connection between UFOs and rather dubious, sensationalistic reporting. And so it cast the whole subject into disrepute. And, of course, that's exactly what psychological warfare people do. They use these types of ploys to muddy the waters and confuse people about what's really going on.
Which is exactly the office that Mr. Pope, founder of the National Enquirer, was working in the CIA.
Well, that's right. So it gets even more interesting when you follow the story a little bit further. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, the National Enquirer made sensational UFO-related news coverage sort of a laughing stock, and it kind of set the pattern for other tabloid newspapers to come, which also, I think, had peripheral links to the intelligence community, although it's maybe a little less clear than with the Enquirer. During the 1970s, Pope was having difficulty getting the National Enquirer into the Winn-Dixie grocery store chain, and got help from, of all people, Melvin Laird, who was Nixon's Secretary of Defense. Laird arranged a tour of the White House, the Nixon White House, for Winn-Dixie grocery store executives. They were so impressed with Pope's clout with the White House that they finally agreed to let the Winn-Dixie grocery store chain carry the National Enquirer. In a story about this by Forbes magazine, a reporter asked Pope about this connection he had with the White House and why he had such clout with the national defense establishment and all that. And he said, well, it's just politics. One hand washes the other. The implication, I think, is that Pope was doing something for either the Nixon White House or the Secretary of Defense, and that in return they were helping him get his paper out into as many places as possible. So now the final footnote to this whole amazing story is that when Pope died in 1988, he was now one of America's wealthiest men, and who of all people gave the eulogy at his funeral but Defense Secretary Melvin Laird, who had been Defense Secretary under Nixon. So again, you have this interesting tie between the national security establishment and the National Enquirer. So you can kind of connect the dots there, and it looks fairly suspicious, I'd say.
The 2 + 2 = 4, that the National Enquirer was a Central Intelligence Agency psychological warfare project.
Yeah, that's the way it certainly looks to me. The fingerprints are all over it. It's hard to come to any other reasonable conclusion. There's no doubt that the National Enquirer had a huge impact on the way many people in the public at large and also in the journalistic establishment see the UFO topic. I mean, by connecting flying saucers and UFOs with this kind of trashy tabloid reporting, it's made this link in people's minds that UFOs are, by definition, disreputable and questionable material, and of course that's exactly what the Robertson panel set out to achieve in 1953. Now, the CIA's official position, I think, is that they never really followed through on the Robertson panel's recommendations, but a letter has come to light through recent research that makes it clear that they were, in fact, doing this sort of thing, because one member of the Robertson panel in 1966 wrote a letter, handwritten letter, to a fellow CIA associate in which he confessed that he had helped organize a CBS television broadcast around the Robertson panel's conclusions. This was a famous broadcast narrated by Walter Cronkite. And we also know, of course, that CBS at this time had a very close working relationship with the intelligence community, so it's not at all surprising that if the CIA wanted to debunk UFOs, it would appeal to organizations such as CBS to help them do that. And this letter really establishes that the Robertson panel's recommendations were being carried out at least as late as 1966, which is 13 years after the recommendations were first made.
Why do you think that so much effort has been put into discrediting and misinformation and psychological warfare to keep the media and the public at an arm's length distance from what leaked government documents call extraterrestrial biological entities?
Well, that's really the $64 million question that, the question everybody would like to have the answer to. I think initially there was quite obvious concern expressed in a lot of internal government documents about the surveillance of U.S. military installations, nuclear weapons facilities, and so forth by flying saucers or UFOs. And so there was naturally, in the minds of the military establishment, there was a concern about potential invasion by some unknown force. And in fact, early on, President Eisenhower actually made a denial on the front page of the New York Times, saying that the world was not being invaded by flying saucers from outer space. So it was clearly a topic of great concern at that time, and on up into the mid-1970s, the flying saucers or UFOs were still flying over our nuclear weapons facilities and interfering with ICBMs and that sort of thing, according to military personnel. So there does seem to be this kind of issue about surveillance and interference with military facilities. There may be other issues as well having to do with economic considerations, military hardware considerations.
You can add animal mutilations and human abductions to the list that the government would have been so concerned that no one know about until they had control over it. And we're talking in May of 2007, and the human abduction syndrome is still reported, and so are worldwide bloodless animal mutilations.
Yep, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think the defense establishment wants to project an image of being in control, and they're obviously not in control and haven't been for quite a long time, and I think they don't want to confess that to the public because that's the source of their power. And I suppose another aspect is just concern about what the public reaction would be if they came out and said that, yeah, these things are going on and there's really very little we can do about them.
Are you convinced that the presence of more than one extraterrestrial or some kind of non-human intelligence is at work on the planet now and has been perhaps for millennia?
Well, it looks that way to me, Linda. I've read just many, many thousands of these accounts from what I think are credible sources, and I don't think you can come to any other conclusion that there's some form of intelligence more advanced than human beings that has been involved with our affairs for quite a long time. I think we first became aware of this in a big way following World War II, but I suspect it's been going on for much longer than that, probably many thousands of years, if not a good deal longer.
Do you think that the CIA and other intelligence agencies still have the fix in the wiring of media such as the New York Times, CBS, and so forth?
I think they do. I haven't seen any real change in media policy about this in the United States anyway. So I think there is still a large, very strong tendency to try to keep the subject under wraps. But it's a question of whether they really have much credibility with the public anymore, because if you look at the public opinion polls, it's pretty clear that most people don't believe what the government is saying about the issue. So in a sense, they've already lost the battle, even though they continue fighting it using the old methods that they've had for so many years.
But do you personally think that in our lifetime that the truth will finally come to the world, that we're not alone, that other advanced intelligences are here interacting with the Earth and have been for millennia?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on who you look to for your source of what is true. I mean, if you look to the political establishment, they're not very good at telling the truth about anything, much less UFOs. So I think it's sort of against their nature to speak the truth about almost anything. But I see this as a microcosm of a much broader political problem in the United States right now, which is a battle for an open society. There's a battle going on between people who want to continue an open democratic society and those who want to try to suppress that. We see this manifesting in a lot of other issues outside the UFO area, but the UFOs are part of that whole problem of secrecy in government and unwillingness to run our country in a democratic fashion.
And tell the truth.
And tell the truth. That's right.
Terry Hansen's investigation of all this is in his book, The Missing Times, which is available at Amazon.com. And I have other link information, hot link information, at earthfiles.com. I also have in my Earth Files report several documents related to intelligence control of the media that have surfaced in the last decade or two, and a fascinating photograph taken on Albert Einstein's 70th birthday. With Einstein is physicist H.P. Robertson, who was in charge of that Robertson panel that Terry was talking about, in which it was reinforced that a policy of denial in the interests of national security should be clamped down on the UFO phenomenon. It was H.P. Robertson who had a close working relationship with intelligence going all the way back to World War II, and his liaison between United States and British scientific intelligence. So Whitley, that which we have always suspected appears to be mounting more and more facts that from the National Enquirer to the New York Times and CBS, they've always been wired to control the truth about the UFO phenomenon.
Well, indeed they have. And a member of the New York Times staff told me that in 1977, I believe it was Richard Helms, actually went to the New York Times and had a meeting with the editor-in-chief at which he said that the New York Times reporting on the UFO phenomenon was damaging and had to stop. And since then, the New York Times has never again reported in any significant way on this phenomenon except to debunk it. And apparently they were told why this was so dangerous and so damaging, but we'll never know the truth of it. Linda?
Than what I was reading about in the books by the researchers that you named.
Well, many of those researchers, Joe, would just set aside anything like a out-of-the-body description or a near-death experience or past life and assume that was part of the masking of the actual experience.
Exactly. And then, of course, I was hit right away with cases where reptilians played a significant role in the abduction cases, the abduction experiences, numerous of these. And they weren't being written about by anybody.
No, they weren't. My new book, my novel, it's coming out in September 2012, The War for Souls, it contains it's very substantially about reptilians because they represent a very important part of the phenomenon and one that tends to be ignored and has been, to a degree, harmed by the strangeness of it and also some of the more peculiar claims, such as David Icke's claim that the Queen of England is a shape-shifted reptilian. Which
I've never ran across anything like that. But
you've never run across any shape-shifted reptilians either. Neither have I.
No. But I will say that they do play an important role, and I dealt with them a lot in my my first book.
Well, this is extremely interesting to me because I started out dealing with the Greys, and I became gradually aware of this other presence in my experience, and eventually I began to see something that reaches across the whole of human history, which is why the rulers of the earth excites me so much. But tell us a little bit more about your impression of them.
Well, the first thing that came to my attention was that they were very much in charge in a lot of cases. They seem to have a position of power and authority and even respect from the other types of beings. And we were getting cases where all the kinds of beings showed up in the same place. We were having cases where they were, the small grays, the tall grays, the insectoids, the ones that look like praying mantises, human-looking ones, and reptilians. It was like
it's very interesting that you mention the praying mantis type ones because very few people I'm aware of mention those. I've seen one of those. I saw one once, and
they're quite common.
Tell us more about what they are like.
Well, again, they and I've had a chance to interview people, experiencers from all over the world now, and hundreds, and I've had the opportunity to study in depth over 100 cases, and so I don't think that I can say that I know everything about this, but I know enough to know that a lot of stuff is not being reported by some researchers. They're pretty much stuck into a mode, that they have
a theory and they fit the cases to the theory. Well, that's why I find talking to you so exciting because you don't do that. You're a very rigorous investigator and you don't fit. You just basically let the witnesses describe what they remember, and you take it from there.
Yeah, I made a promise when I started doing my research, and it was a promise to myself and a promise to God and a promise to my readers that I would report everything that I found, no matter how crazy it seemed. And that doesn't mean that people have to believe it, but it's my pledge that I will be honest in my research. I think that is so important because, I tell about my own religious background. It's pretty much autobiographical, a great part of this, because what I found is you cannot be objective. You in this, when you're dealing with this subject matter, this involves the entire human race. And to go in as the objective reporter and try to stay aloof and not get involved is, I think, an impossibility.
Of course it is. And in some respects, this is what has happened to some of the investigators, because they've ended up filtering the descriptions of through a belief system. But on the other hand, Joe, they would turn around and say, no, we have this set of very comprehensible things that happen to people. And we also know that these beings are experts at deception. And therefore that they are trying to insinuate themselves into our world and to link themselves to our mythology to make it look as if they've been part of our world for a long time. Make for a great interview. What makes for a great interview is a fabulous lifetime of research into the UFO and alien abduction phenomena and the credentials to justify his work. Joe Lewels is a Ph.D. He's an internationally known author and speaker. He holds his Ph.D. in journalism and mass communication from the University of Missouri. He's got an MS in education from Troy State University. He is a certified hypnotherapist. He has worked with many abductees, and he's drawn some quite remarkable conclusions and made some fascinating discoveries about the UFO phenomenon, especially as it relates to the distant origins of contact in biblical times. We're going to have an absolutely fascinating journey with Joel today, talking about things like the reptilians, the watchers, and who it was who was here before the catastrophe that we now call the flood wiped away all traces of their existence among us, leaving us with the myths that we hold now. Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God is Joe's new book, available from your bookstore, from our online bookstore, from Amazon, from just about everywhere. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Whitley. Just a pleasure to talk to you again. Just one of your biggest fans.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's mutual. I believe the last time we talked was when you had a previous book out. If I can remember the name of it, I can't.
The God Hypothesis.
The God Hypothesis, that's right.
Right. They came out 10 years apart.
So it's been that long. Gosh, I've been doing Dreamland for a while.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this is the sequel to the God Hypothesis.
Well, okay, now let's get into this whole story a little bit. And first, I would like to, you have a very unique take on this. You're not like Bud Hopkins or David Jacobs, although you know their work very well. You have your own unique take. And Joe, what would you say is the primary difference between your work and that of other UFO investigators?
I think the primary
investigators.
difference,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the primary difference is that I did not come into this research with a firm notion of what it was. I questioned everybody and everyone's conclusions who had already been involved in this before I got involved. I just came into it like with a blank slate. And what I immediately noticed was that there was a vast difference between what I was getting from the people that I was researching, the UFO experiencers. I was getting through our research, and I had a team that included a psychiatrist and qualified hypnotherapist, and right away we were getting people during hypnotic regression gaining information about past lives. That was the first thing. We were getting a lot of out-of-body stuff. It was much spookier